Hello and welcome to Capturing Christianity. My name is Cameron Bertuzzi. I'm here today with Dr. Josh Rasmussen, and we're talking about how to not be an idiot when it comes to politics. And the title of this video is a little bit rhetorical. It's a little. Anyways, what we're talking about today is basically how to still care about truth while you're thinking about politics, something related to politics. Just mainly how to care about truth. And so we're going to look at some pitfalls in obstacles that get in the way of trying to get to truth. And Dr. Rasmussen, if you've seen him before, he's an expert in philosophy of religion. So he knows very, very well certain arguments for God's existence. Right now, he's working in an argument from consciousness, actually. Not a lot of you may know that, but his current work right now is in an argument for God's existence from consciousness. But he also, and this was something we were talking about before we went live today, is that he's also constantly thinking about how to really care about truth. And not just in like a, oh yeah, I care about truth kind of way, but like, no, every day living it out, trying to do your best at it. This is something he's constantly thinking about. He's poured over it in his own way. And I, in a lot of ways, I think that I do the same. So I'm constantly every day thinking about, actually, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this video, was because, and I'll just go ahead and start, Josh.
Yeah.
I realized a couple years ago, I don't know, I don't have like an exact timeline, but as I was getting into philosophy and apologetics, I discovered that getting at the truth or caring about truth was actually a whole lot more difficult than I initially thought. I initially thought that like, oh yeah, like everybody, I definitely care about truth because I'm a Christian and I want to know what's true. But eventually, like as I started to encounter really good objections to my faith, eventually it started to get difficult to still care about truth. And so it was a journey that I had to like work my way through and learn and really be comfortable with, because you got to be vulnerable. You got to be open to like giving up what you've held for your entire life. It's not easy. It's not easy to really care about truth with something so serious. But in philosophy and apologetics, I eventually learned, I think, how to do that when it came to that area. But was I applying it consistently in other areas? And so then I started to really evaluate my own political beliefs. And I was like, well, you know, I grew up in a very, very conservative family, and I grew up with these beliefs kind of pushed on me when I was young. And that's like what I heard in the household and everything.
Pushed on
And
you
so
by force.
it wasn't forced, it wasn't indoctrinated, but that's just what I grew up believing.
Yeah.
And that's like, I just thought, oh yeah, conservatives have all the truth, and that's just what it is. And if same thing happened in apologetics and philosophy, you encounter these objections that you didn't know were out there, or these different viewpoints. And so there's this sort of cognitive dissonance that happens. And so I started to, basically the whole point, the whole story is that I started to apply it to politics. And now I'm like just wrestling with all of these different things, trying to really still strive and care about truth in this area, as opposed to just striving for what I grew up, or the sort of household that I grew up in, or the political beliefs that my parents had. I'm trying to really strive for truth in this area. And it's really difficult. Politics, as I'm sure a lot of you know, the reason why you're even watching this stream is because it's difficult to really care about and seek truth in the area of politics. So I've said enough. Josh, go ahead and tell me, why are you interested in this subject?
Well, yeah, I mean, so the title I wrote down was How to Care About Truth in a Polarized World. And I like what you said, Cameron, about the sort of pressure to care about other things. I mean, I actually think everybody naturally cares about truth. Like we all want the truth, right? But sometimes what happens is there are other things that make it harder to stay focused on that quest. I think about like if you want to get to the top of a mountain, a certain mountain, there's a mountain in our neighborhood and our kids wanted to climb that mountain. And one random day, I said, all right, let's get to the top of the mountain. On that day, I decided to seek to get to something. And I'm way more likely to get on top of that mountain if I decide to seek to get on top of that mountain than if I don't. And so sure enough, we got the family together and we embarked to get onto the top of that mountain. And it was fun. It was a good family experience. And we did get to the top. It was a good time. But if we had never chosen to try to get to the top, then we never would have succeeded. But now what happens if you try to get to the top and people start creating fences, or maybe let's imagine that they start to blame you for trying to get to the top of that mountain. They start to accuse you. They start to shame you. Then you might start to feel embarrassed. Maybe you now want to do something other than get to the top of that mountain. You want to go find another path. And so I think what happens is there's often this tension between good things, actually. The good thing of getting to the truth and the good thing of not being embarrassed, right? I mean, or being known by people, or not doing something that could be dangerous, right? And because there is a conflict between these things, it takes certain kind of discipline and certain focus. So what I did in preparation for our time, Cameron, is I was thinking about like, what is the biggest barrier that stops people from caring about the truth? I mean, I think we all do care about the truth naturally. Sometimes we lose that focus, and like, what stops that? I wrote down in my notes that I think the biggest barrier, or at least a big barrier, to caring about the truth is feeling powerless to get to the truth. So we feel powerless, and that powerless feeling shows up in the way we respond to others. Instead of controlling ourselves, we try to control others. We try to manipulate their beliefs. We try to sort of imagine a scenario in which our team can sort of be known, right? Because we feel powerless to be known or something. And so what I wrote here is 10 truth-seeking traps that make people feel powerless, that put people into a pit of lack of power. You can't get out of the pit. And then how to avoid those traps. So I've got a list of 10, and we can begin to work through those 10. But was there anything you wanted to add or comment on with this sort of introduction?
Before we start, what I'd like to do is just get some clarity on what you mean by powerless, because when you initially said that to me in our emails, I was like, how is powerlessness the cause of, people not caring about truth? So I didn't and maybe that's just going to like be clearer as we go on and as we go through the 10 different things that you have planned. But that was a question that I had, is like, because that's not what I would say is like the thing that keeps us away from getting at truth.
Yeah,
So
there's maybe
maybe
many
just give me some
roots,
clarity.
but I think the reason why I said that is because I was talking with my sister. She's a therapist, and she works with people who have suffered from trauma. And then the trauma sometimes leads to addictions. And there's this phenomenon where people who are experiencing powerlessness are seeking to feel okay, to feel worthy of being loved, to be known. And that attempt to meet those needs will sometimes show up in a kind of pattern of responding towards others that isn't after the truth, but it's after maybe protecting something. Sometimes this even involves saying things that aren't true, or maybe saying things that are true in a way that kind of manipulates a narrative. And the goal there is to protect oneself. But why is one trying to protect oneself? Well, people are feeling powerless. They're feeling powerless to be seen. They're feeling powerless to get the truth that they think that they see communicated to others. And because of that powerlessness, there's a pattern of trying to control others that actually creates barriers to truth flow, so that people aren't really getting to the truth. And it's even harder to care about the truth because you start caring more about maybe protecting yourself or controlling others.
So it's powerlessness with respect to different things. So it's like powerlessness with respect to be able to communicate properly or in a way that is convincing to someone else. So, but powerlessness and lack of power, as you put it, is like the thing that's behind it. It's like, it's what ties all of the different things together that are the root
like
cause.
You don't have control. You don't have that. You're afraid. Things are out of control. So you're trying to get control. And
or like like when I think about having a conversation with somebody who is obviously more well read in some particular thing, say abortion, then in that case, I might feel powerless in my ability to or in what I know. I lack power in knowledge in this area.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Yes.
Right?
You feel like
and so that might cause me to get defensive.
Truth. Yes.
Yeah. Even though I'm still really convinced that abortion is wrong, then because I don't have all of the studies and everything else that I would need in order to refute this other person's position, I feel powerless.
Yeah. Powerless in the conversation to kind of control the conversation. And so you might say something sort of assertively as a way of gaining more power, But then you have to be careful
You might
because
laugh
are
at the
you
other
covering
person.
for a lack of knowledge? It's like, are you covering for a lack of really having studied all the data relevant to the topic? Of course, everybody has the feeling that they have knowledge, and that's the other person who doesn't have knowledge in a disagreement,
Right.
right? And so that's what creates this problem. I'm actually curious before I get into my list to hear maybe what you were thinking of as roots of causing people not to care about truth.
Well, I always go back to, and I'd have to think more about it, but there's one thing that I like to say a lot, and it's like the reason why people go into debates a lot of times is due to some kind of like deep rooted insecurity. But I think that our views on this are really similar if I understand what you're saying is the lack of power as it relates to other certain things like lack of knowledge, lack of maybe debate skills, something like that, or like, yeah. So I think that they're related in a lot of ways. My theory about why people debate so often or feel like they've got to go, atheists and Christians got to debate all the time online on
Mm-hmm.
Facebook and stuff. I think that they're trying to win or trying to make themselves feel better, and that's rooted in an insecurity that you have. Like you want to be affirmed by somebody. You want someone to see you a certain way. So I think that that's the reason why, in my mind, why people fail at getting at truth or caring about truth in the right way, and consistently across many areas. And politics in general is very emotional. I think in a lot of ways we're talking about things that are just some of the things are horrible. Like if you think that abortion is wrong, then that like you can understand why someone would want to get emotional about that. And so I
Mm-hmm.
would say it's like a combination of some insecurities that someone might have, combined with like the emotion that's involved in a lot of these political discussions, or just the political topics themselves, like immigration. That gets people emotional too. You feel like people who really want to take care of immigrants and even illegal immigrants will get really emotional. Like, no, don't put a child in a cage.
Mm-hmm.
So there's, I think the combination of emotion and probably insecurity would be the two things that I would point at. But I can see how those could fall under the umbrella of powerlessness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and these are things we all experience. We all experience that insecurity. We all experience sort of what it's like to see that, oh, here's a problem. I think what happens sometimes is that the seriousness of the problem will touch our hearts because we want to have that problem solved. But then good people can come to different views about how to solve the problem. And it's difficult when things are polarized and people don't trust each other, because what happens then is that instead of just disagreeing about how best to solve the problem, there becomes a kind of enemy mentality. Like, you guys don't even care about this problem.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen this so many times, and it does bother me when I see this, when I see good people on different sides of a political conversation, and I know them personally. Like, I'm talking about friends that I know from relationship, and I know their heart, and I know that they desire that a certain problem be solved on both sides, but they have different views about how best to solve the problem. And then when people on different sides are accusing the other side and saying, oh, you actually don't want to solve that problem because you couldn't possibly desire to solve that problem by this method. And usually
Mm-hmm.
what happens is people aren't even understanding how it is that they haven't had enough of a conversation to see how it is that the person is actually thinking that that problem will be solved through this means. It's like it doesn't go far enough because of the enemy mentality, which creates that fence. You're my enemy, so I have to oppose you. And the difficulty is that there are enemies, right? Like, there are enemies. I mean, every one of us at times in our lives are enemies of the good. So we can all play the role of enemy. And so because of that, it takes a lot of wisdom to know how to have these conversations in a way that actually promotes truth. I feel like fundamentally, it's like you have to make that an aim, right? And I'm not saying this as a way of saying, oh, well, Cameron and I, like, we care about truth the
We're the
most, and we're going to
masters.
help you guys all care about truth or something. But it's like we've experienced this firsthand. I think that conflict between the sort of the tension in the conversations, where we even detect in our own selves the conflict things that we're caring about.
Yeah,
So
and I just
yeah.
want to add to that. Like I'm trying to do what I can to reflect on like the reasons why I feel a certain way, or like I want to respond to somebody a certain way. And in the past, I've noticed that like I've taken note of the way that I've responded to people, and like what is driving this? Why am I like getting so upset in this conversation for no reason when all he did was like give me a study that conflicts with something I said? And it's like, why does that make me so upset? And so I had to really think about that. And I think it is because of either emotion or some kind of insecurity. It's like, okay, he's making me look bad. Like I don't have a response to that. Like how do I maintain my integrity in this conversation? And because it's public, there's people looking. And so it's like, I've really had to think about that. Like, why do I do this? Why is that something that's like, and I don't think it just applies to me. I think it applies to a lot of people. And so as we reflect sort of anecdotally, I think just human nature is going to play a part in why and how this might impact other people and be helpful to other people. So let's get to let's get to your list of 10 different things. And I'm sure that I'll have more things to add.
Yeah, I'm going to just read my list. I've got notes under each one, but I'm just going to just read the whole list, and then I'll go back. I'm going to read it from bottom to top, and then I'll see if we can work through it. So I just put down here, number 10 was controlling others rather than yourself. Number 9, a defensiveness, where you're preoccupied with proving that you actually are the one who's right. So like that becomes your focus more than trying to expand the conversation or try to get new data onto the table. Number 8, filling your mind with thoughts about others who don't care about truth. So when we're talking about caring about truth, you imagine these particular people that you're thinking, oh yeah, like those people don't care about truth, and I want to expose that. So you fill your mind with that. And that, I think, is a kind of a trap that can make you less powerful to get more truth yourself. Number 7, focusing on what you can't control, like what other people are saying on Fox News or on CNN. So you're like dwelling on that, and you're thinking about that, and maybe you're wishing they didn't say that. It's really weird. I actually woke up this morning, and somehow I had the screen in my mind of the news expressing accusation about people, and I just kind of woke up feeling disturbed. It was like, I don't know what it was. It was just, I haven't even really been watching the news, but somehow I kind of woke up with that image in my mind. And so it takes certain discipline to focus on what you can control and not dwelling on what you can't control. At number 6, I said too much scatter. So there's like too much stuff. You go onto Facebook, there's so many conversations and disputes calling for your attention. And it takes a certain discipline to focus on the topics or the purposes that are more central to what you have to offer. Or maybe there's a question that you're trying to find out the truth about or to share ideas about. And if you get too much scatter, then it makes you less powerful. And if you're less powerful, then I think that that's going to cause you to not care as much about getting the truth because you don't feel like you have the power to get to the truth. Number 5, too much complexity. So it's too much information. You can't figure it out. So you start to lose the motivation to try. And I think a lot of people can feel like this interest in getting to the truth with such passion, but then they can recognize that there's so much complexity that leads to a kind of intellectual humility. And sometimes that intellectual humility actually allows you to see more complexity, but then seeing that greater complexity can then be a barrier to getting more truth. So that's a challenge there. Number 4, anxiety. Healthy fear protects you, but anxiety magnifies the negative. So we can talk more about that. Number 3, under number 3, I have the Dunning-Kruger effect, because Cameron, you mentioned this before our time together. And number 3, I said failing to take the other person's perspective. And this happens sometimes when you think you know a lot, and so you think you already know the other person's perspective, but the other person actually has information that you don't have. It's work to get that. Number 2, I have like the most notes on number 2 and then number 1. But number 2, negative narratives about groups of people you agree with. And then number 1 is negative narratives about groups of people that you disagree with. This is under the point about accusation, which I would like to unpack a bit. But I wanted just to get those 10 out there and just list them. We may not go into detail on all of these, but I want to get those on the table. Any thoughts, Cameron?
Let's go into detail. Let's just jump right in and let's work
Go right
in
in.
reverse order. So let's start with one, excuse
Yeah.
me, because that's the one I think you had the most written about or most things that you wanted to say. So let's just go through like the list and provide
Yeah.
some meat on the bones.
Yeah. Good. So under accusation, negative narratives about groups of people you disagree with. So here's the thing that I've noticed is that for any large group of people, there's always going to be a negative narrative about that group if that group disagrees with some other large group. This will always happen. Like think of any two large groups, okay? The political left, the political right, atheists, Christians. Think of any large groups where there's disagreement and then ask yourself, is there anybody painting a negative narrative about that group? Yes, like I can't think of any exception to that. So there's always going to be a negative narrative. And when the group is large, you're always going to find people in that group who actually fit the negative narrative. And so it's really interesting. Actually, I was listening to the radio the other day, and somebody was describing a group of people and was describing their motives and how those people are. And it just so happens that this group of people are people that I tend to disagree with. And so when the person on the radio was describing the negative narrative about their motives and who they really are, I immediately thought of like 6 people that seem to exemplify that negative narrative. And I don't know if it like created dopamine in my mind or whatever. Like it felt like, oh yeah, like that's right. That's right. And then I don't know, like maybe it's because I've been thinking about the problem of negative narratives that I paused and I asked myself, well, is that really true of that everybody in that group? And then by asking that question, all of a sudden I thought of a whole bunch of people that don't fit that narrative. In fact, people who are exactly the opposite of that narrative. And so what happens is that the negative narratives tend to oversimplify. But if you're not careful, you can always find people who exemplify that negative narrative. And so if you find yourself having a kind of simplified black and white, everybody in this group is bad and dumb, and everybody in this other group, like maybe some of them aren't so good, but we're generally virtuous right over here. Of course, that's the group that we're belonging to. Negative narratives about groups of people you disagree with are very easy to believe because the people that you disagree with, especially about the things that really matter to you, they can feel a little bit threatening. And when you feel a little bit threatened, then it's harder to build trust. And so negative narratives reinforce the distrust.
This is one of the things that I've...
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, this is one of the things that I learned from you, Josh, is like looking for the good of what someone else is trying to do. Like when I have a disagreement with somebody, and I guess when it comes to politics or anything else, I mean, it could be anything, like classical theism. A lot of people that watch my channel know that I'm not subscribed to classical theism. I think there's problems with divine simplicity, and although I'm not an expert in those areas, there are times when I have disagreements with people. But so what I've tried to like train myself to do, and I picked up this from you, Josh, is like, okay, let me pause a second and really think about what's going on in the other person's mind. Like why are they saying the things that they're saying? And it's probably because they, in their mind, think that they're like searching for some virtue, right? They're searching for either the truth, or they think that there's some kind of like moral principle that's at stake here, or like I've got this principle, like it's just always wrong to kill human babies or whatever else. If abortion is like your moral principle. And someone who is like pro-choice may not realize that that is sort of what's driving you, is this moral principle that you have in your mind. But the point is that it took me a while to really just like slow down and just realize that people, I think in general, really are trying to strive towards some virtue. And so I had to like realize that even people that I disagree with, that's, I think, their ultimate goal too. And so we're kind of in this together. It's like, it's not a battle between this other person and myself. I think that we're both on this journey to get to these virtues, but we just have disagreements along maybe what the moral principles are, or maybe some of the facts that support the moral principles. So that's where really the disagreement is. It's not a fundamental disagreement between me and this other person. I think we both are on the same page, at least as far as like what we're trying to ultimately get at. And so realizing that has really helped me care about people and love them even through disagreement. It's really a challenge, but that's one thing that I've picked up on from you is to just realize that, yeah, there are these, and everybody has them, like these negative stories about these other people groups. But
Yeah.
if you can look past that, that can really take out one of the biggest obstacles to really seeking truth, not just on your own, but with other people. So like cooperative seeking truth
Yes.
is also something that, that a lot of people struggle with, is like, how can I disagree with, how can I have a conversation with somebody that I disagree with? How can we do it together? So
Yeah,
yeah, those are
different
just some of my
perspectives
rambling thoughts.
actually really help you to get more truth. In my dialogue book with Felipe Leon, we were investigating together the foundation of existence. I took the theist side, he took the non-theist side. And somehow we came into this place of building together. So we were actually looking for the good in the other person's arguments and their theories. And it was really fascinating how much we learned from each other. I mean, I learned so much from him through the conversation. And there's a philosopher, Paul Draper. He had a graduate school a group where they were looking at the book and reading through it. And Paul told me that he felt like when we interacted with each other, we didn't waste time misrepresenting each other. He was very pleased that it seemed like we really understood each other in our responses. And that was very encouraging to hear. It also testifies to the value of really spending time to seek that other person's perspective, because by doing that, you're going to spend less time misrepresenting somebody, and you're going to have more opportunity to get to more truth together. It's like a cooperative effort. Now, I do think there are different cases. So sometimes people aren't working together and they're not maybe after all the same things. But what I've discovered, Cameron, is that even in those cases, there's still always something good that you can find in other people. And if you can just choose, because when people feel powerless, they don't know what they can control, right? But here's something that everybody can control. You can choose what you're looking for. You can choose if you're looking to defeat the other person so that you can see more powerful than them. You can make that choice. And I'm not judging that choice. I'm just saying that's a choice you can make, right? Or you can actually seek to give a gift. You can actually seek to find gold, true gold, not a kind of flattery that you're then going to use to manipulate and then really control them. But you're actually trying to identify things that are good in what they're saying. And I've just discovered that project, it takes a certain work, but it's actually a lot of fun, because then you find things and you find yourselves having more productive conversations, in my experience.
So let's get on to the second one.
Yeah. So I wanted just to add something here. Turn it around. You can scan for the good. This is still on the first one. I just want to kind of finish off my notes here.
Okay.
Value of perspective taking. Loving your enemies makes you more powerful at seeing more. It's not just a spiritual principle. It actually helps you to see more because you see more of their perspective. I had this kind of open-ended worry that I don't have a complete answer to, but I welcome wisdom on this, which is, how do you avoid becoming a rag doll to somebody who is intent on abusing you so that they don't share the goal? And my sort of soft answer to that is, you still control what you can control. So you can control your response. You can't control them, but you can set healthy boundaries, or you can control whether you're going to provide a genuine gift of love. That's what I had there. Okay, so the next one, negative narratives about groups of people you agree with. Okay, so this isn't negative narratives about groups that you disagree with. This is when there's a negative story about, let's say, your group. So now you're watching the news and somebody is telling a story about those people, but you're actually among those people. How do you feel? What do you do? How do you respond? Okay. They don't just say that you're mistaken. They say that you're bad. You're dishonest. You don't care about the truth. You hate people. Everybody can relate to this experience. Every single person watching this knows what this is like. And the easiest thing to do, I've noticed, is to be a mirror. So if somebody says of me, Josh, your beliefs are too good to be true, you must not actually care about the truth. Of course, everybody wants to think that they care about the truth, but we know you're trying to manipulate us to believe what you want to believe because it makes you feel good or whatever. There's some narrative. So then my temptation is to respond by being a mirror and say, no, you are the one. Here's the irony of what you're saying about me. You're actually the one who doesn't really care about the truth. That's really what's going on. So that's kind of like the easy thing to mirror. And what I've actually noticed is that when people have a negative thing about you, it's usually not about you in particular. Usually what's happening is people are responding to the negative thing characterizing their group, and you are now representing, if you disagree with their group, the other group, the group of people who are accusing them. And so they're just being a mirror to the group. See, this is why group conflict makes individual conflict more complex, because it's not just about you, it's about the group
defending
conflict.
the group.
Yes. So how do you
But
get
that's
out
interesting,
of that,
your
right?
point. Yeah, it's interesting your point about the mirrors, how everyone's just kind of mirroring each other. And so it's almost like a perpetual cycle of emotion and falling away from the ultimate goal of caring about truth. I mean, I noticed the live chat, someone said earlier in the live chat, they're like, this conversation is so boring. And that just like, I read that and I was like, that really stinks. You know, I think that this is a really cool conversation. It's really something that a lot of people probably will benefit from and it'll be helpful to people. And it's comments like that that can really distract me from the ultimate goal. And the ultimate goal being just having a good, helpful conversation for people that might find it interesting, you know? And so it's interesting, like the little things that can just like take us off of our path or our goal and can just completely distract us from what we were originally trying to get at. Even though it's just like a little thing sometimes, a little side comment, a little sneer, you know? And that's all that it was, but it really just like gets at you and it gets in the way. And I think that's related to pretty much all of the different things that you had here.
Yeah. Well, and that negativity bias, it attracts our attention. And the thing is that, I mean, we have this power to like change the game. I mean, that all of the conflict that people are having right now about what's true, there's actually a way to change. Like, this is the most, I almost feel like, powerful and important thing. Like, if everybody can sort of get this, it can really change the game. I have in my notes, this is how you change the game. So when you're in this context of mirroring and people are mirroring the negative, what you can do is actually just operate in the opposite spirit. So you have the spirit of God, love, joy, peace, patience. So you actually respond to people, not by trying to figure out, okay, how can I expose that they're the ones who have the vice, but you look for gold, you look for something good, and then you offer that. And I've just discovered, Cameron, that I could tell you story after story where that kind of shift just changes everything. I have actually in my notes a story about a philosopher. Oh yeah, when I was in graduate school, I was going on the job market. And so my reputation at that point was, of course, very important for me to get a job. And there was some philosopher, and I don't remember the details of it, but for whatever reason, this philosopher was saying something about me or my work that was negative. And I heard about this from a friend. So this already told me that this was kind of like passed around if it got to a friend and he told me about it. And so it was like negative, right? So that, what am I going to do? I'm feeling bad. Like, you know, all the stakes are high. I've got to get a job. My reputation, it needs to be good. And it was interesting because for whatever reason, I just decided I want to see if I can respond in a positive way. So I didn't know the philosopher, but I just went to his website and I read an article that he wrote. It was on an unfamiliar topic, but I found a few things in that article that I thought were really great. And so I emailed this philosopher just out of the blue. He didn't know me personally, but I just emailed him and I told him what I appreciated about his work, how I really valued it. And it was so interesting, Cameron, because it's like, you know, what's going to happen, right? I mean, how is he going to take that? But he responded almost immediately, and he was so pleased by what I said about the value of his work that it was like so encouraging to him that he said that he wanted to do the same thing and that he also emailed somebody else about the value of their work. So like pass it forward. I never heard anything negative about, you know, from that philosopher again, from that point. So there's something about just changing the game. Like, don't just be a mirror of the negative. Do something different. Stand out. Be bold.
As you were talking about that, I'm clearing my throat a lot today. I was thinking about an analogy, and the analogy comes from a movie that was released in 1999. So it's going to age me a little bit. But in 1999, a movie called The Matrix came out. And so the analogy is, I think most people are kind of in autopilot. Like, you're stuck in the Matrix. We're just like doing your everyday thing, and you get in a conversation with somebody and you just like let your emotions take the steering wheel, and you're just like driven by your impulses and your emotions, and just like whatever is sort of just the first thing that comes to mind is what you do. Whereas what I think the challenge is to pull yourself out of the matrix. And Neo, he kind of like, he had to get some help to get out. He started to see some things here and there, but the goal is to get out and see it from the other perspective, so that you can really start to control your actions in these conversations, in not just in conversations with others, but in your own mind, like your own self conversations. I have conversations with myself quite often about ideas and arguments and everything. And so the analogy is, I'm not saying that everyone is like stupid and stuck in the matrix or anything like that. I know that from my own experience, I was stuck in the matrix, so to speak, when before I became interested in apologetics and learned about philosophy, before basically I learned that my brother became an atheist. I was just like doing my own thing, just like going to church, and that was it. I wasn't really thinking too deeply about my beliefs, or like, what's true, or how is there any evidence for what I believe, and any of that stuff. And so in a very real way, I was one of those people stuck in the matrix, not really reflecting on and trying to drive myself, and really care about these virtues, as opposed to just like being driven by my own human nature, my own fallen human nature. So yeah, I think if we can try to do that, that's my goal, is to just like help people become aware of what's happening in their own like situation, in their own conversations, is like, just don't be controlled by your impulses, and try to like take the driver, and that's a question that I have for you. How can we convince people to do that, to take that step, when it's so much easier to just like stay where you're at?
You convince yourself. For me, I have to convince myself to do it, and it's a daily decision, and I get new opportunities to make that decision. You model it. Because what that does, it gives people the freedom. If you try to convince somebody to be virtuous, you're almost sort of implying that you're better than them. You're like, please be virtuous, and then that usually doesn't work. I've experienced. It doesn't work when people do that to me. Like if people say to me, sort of in subtle ways or non-subtle ways, like, Josh, you need to stop being so bad. It's like, oh, okay, well, help me understand more specifically exactly why you think I was being bad in those ways, because I'm not quite seeing that. Whereas if somebody else is just modeling virtues in tough circumstances, that's very attractive. And then I'll see them like, oh man, like good job, Cameron. And I'm like, I could do better at that. So that's how it is for me. I mean, I find that you can model it, and that's the best way to encourage others to do it. And that also puts the power back on yourself. You can control your response. That's kind of a theme, I think, for how to get more truth. Is you control what you can control. Yeah.
All right, let's move on to your third obstacle.
So I have here, truth flows through the streams of trust. Fear destroys trust. So how can you restore trust? Well, the first fruit of the Spirit is love. Love casts out fear and restores the streams of trust. That was the final note on the second one. Then on the third one was failing to take the other person's perspective. So I don't understand how they can think that. If you hear somebody say, I don't understand how they can think that, that's actually a clue that person maybe doesn't really understand. They're being honest about that. Like they really don't understand. They haven't really entered the other person's perspective. And here I put in the Dunning-Kruger effect, which you had some notes on this, Cameron. And sort of the problem here is that, well, I'll read what you put, okay? You said, I think a big pitfall is failing to understand that lots of ink has been spilled by academics on virtually every political idea. But then when you haven't studied those ideas, you might think that you know more. And so this will lead to a problem where if you know less, you don't know what you don't know. And so you're maybe more assertive. And then I added, yes, and academics often become experts at on a very small slice, and then we don't know how much we don't know about other slices. And so the Dunning-Kruger effect applies to us very much. In fact, it can even be more difficult for us to recognize our blind spots because competence in one area gives us a sense of confidence in others. And so we think that we know, but we just don't.
So if this is your first time hearing this Dunning-Kruger effect, basically what it is these two guys discovered that there's a pattern in people not just in people that are less competent, but people that are more competent as well. There's a pattern to basically people are really bad at judging their own competency in some area. So people who are less competent, who have less knowledge, who have less skills, and just don't know the subject very well, those people tend to rate their competence higher way higher than they should. But people who are on the other side of the scale, who are actually competent in some field, who are experts, they tend to rate themselves lower. So people are just really bad at accurately rating their own competency. And you can see how that's going to play into these types of conversations in politics, and how you're having a conversation with somebody. You're like, yeah, I feel really confident about this political position I have. Yet you haven't read one single academic paper or any books on the subject in question. And there's obviously multiple sides to it. There's people who are, philosophers who have dedicated their lives to these areas and written extensive papers. And so it's just, I think it's really important. Taking the other perspective, I think, is kind of what you're getting at here. Ultimately, is
if you find yourself very confident and you haven't done a lot of research, let that be like a flag that shows up in your mind and says, okay, warning. If you're very confident and you haven't yourself done the primary research, then there's a certain probability that the reason you're so confident is that somebody else is thinking for you. They're putting their beliefs into your mind, and so you just have a confidence from others. You didn't do the primary research. I noticed in my necessarybeing.com website in the initial trial period, when people were emailing, some people emailed to report problems. And it was so interesting because there were a set of people who reported a problem with a kind of confidence, like a certainty that there was a mistake. And there was one person who sent in an email with a question about a possible mistake. And it turned out that every single person who was confident that there was a mistake, I made a clarification and they agreed that there wasn't a mistake in every one of those cases. In the one case where the person just asked a question about maybe there's a mistake here, they were right. There actually was a mistake there that had to be fixed. So the person who was the humblest had the most insight, and the people who were the most confident the confidence was a cover for lack of insight. So let that be a clue. That can be overstated. I mean, sometimes you can have confidence because you have sight, you really know something. But let it be a clue. If I find that if you have confidence, you haven't done the primary research, and you add to that a kind of negativity about others, you're almost certainly lacking in insight. Almost certainly.
Yeah, and I think that there's a problem with people. There's a lot of people who just don't care about expert opinion and don't care about like actually reading and looking more into issues and everything. And a lot of people just don't want to do that. Like they don't trust experts. They don't think that there's really anything there that they can gain from it, which I think actually goes to play in the whole Dunning-Kruger thing. But here's maybe a way that you can think about it that might help. Is in your, so think about the field that you're currently in. So whatever career that you have, if you're a plumber, or if you're, an astrophysicist, or whatever you are, if you're a lawyer, whenever you go into your field, typically if you're going to be like if you're going to be like the best plumber or one of the best plumbers, then what you're going to have to do is do some research and figure out like, okay, what do the smartest plumbers have to say about this issue? I'm thinking about plumbing because we just moved and we had a plumber here yesterday. So when it comes to like these individual fields, when it comes to like your job, then you definitely appreciate if you're the type of person that cares about being like the best at your position, or like one of the best plumbers or photographers, whatever. If you care about that, then you're pretty much going to care about like what the best people have to say, or like you're going to go find the best plumber that and like learn everything that you can from that person. And so I think what that reveals is that if you can just apply that same virtue to the area of politics or to the area of apologetics or philosophy. So apply that same thinking. I can be the best at this area if I take into consideration what the best people that are already in this area have to say. And so if you apply that, you can it's just easy to see that it's not going to hurt you. I think maybe you may not want to do it because it seems like a lot of work, but that's not really a good reason. And it could be taking you away from the truth. That could be a barrier to truth and this wasn't featured on your list, but laziness. You're lazy. Mm-hmm. You don't want to do it. And I feel the same way. There's times when I'm laying in my bed, I'm like, I really don't want to read a book right now or like try to grow in some area. I just want to like lay down and just like watch TV and veg out. And that's not really an excuse. It's not a good excuse to when we're actually in these conversations, when we're doing our deep thinking about these really serious issues,
Hmm.
then it's not a good excuse to just be like, okay, well, I don't have time. That's another thing. Everybody has time. You have time. If you think that you don't have time to go read a paper, then here's a challenge for you. Take one day, write down every single thing that you do in that day. So if you go to the bathroom, write down you were in the bathroom 5 minutes. You had breakfast, that was 10 minutes. And then if you get on your phone, you check Facebook, write that down too. Write down everything that you do in one day, and then go back the next day and look at your list and see the areas that you can cut out. At least like 10 minutes a day, you can find it so easily. Trust me, if you do something like that. I said this actually on Matt Frad's show. I saw that he was in the live chat. So hey, Matt, if you're here, but that if you do that, you're going to be able to find time. So that's not an excuse, really. But
Yeah.
Josh,
Well, and
what do
I'll
you?
listen
Yep.
to audiobooks while I'm doing dishes, so that helps too, because I'm doing something that I need to do, house chores, but I can be still absorbing information. And you don't have to automatically believe the experts, right? I mean,
Yeah.
claim your own personal sovereignty. It's just, it helps to know what different experts are saying. I find it it's just very helpful. Um,
Yeah, and I think that
yeah.
going back to the point, your third point here is like trying to put yourself in the shoes of the other person, then put
Yeah.
yourself in the shoes of the other experts who disagree with you. Maybe that's a way to tie it back into your original point. I'll say one last thing,
Yeah.
and then we'll get on to the next one. We've got a long way to go, and we're almost like an hour in. So let me just
Well,
say this one last thing.
yeah.
So Trent Doherty, I was watching a video or an interview that someone did with him, and if you don't know who Trent Doherty is, he's a Christian philosopher. He wrote a book fairly recently, I think in 2014, on animal suffering, and he's done a lot of work in the problem of evil. He's one of the biggest players in that area, but he was explaining to somebody in an interview how it really started to get to him when he was looking at what these other people had to say about the problem of evil, like these atheists who are giving these really strong arguments against God's existence from the fact of suffering and the fact of evil. And you've really got to dwell on like some of these really horrendous cases. And he was saying it like really messed him up. And I heard that and I was like, when was the last time I did that? When was the last time that like I got messed up by just looking at some really strong arguments against my views? It's like
Hmm.
hasn't really happened anytime recently, but I think that's something to strive for, is to really like if you're going to take this seriously and really try to get at truth, then to take the other side that seriously
Hmm.
where it like messes you up. I don't know. I see that as very, very virtuous. It seems very challenging. It seems very difficult. You've got to like really face, your fears in a really real way. You've got to face
Yeah.
like what it's almost anxiety inducing. So it takes a lot of courage, but I think
Yeah.
that it can really just reflect on that, is all I'll say.
Oh, that's so good. Yeah. Yeah. Truth takes courage. And the only thing I want to add on this point here is that I think all of us experience this effect where we're not an expert at something, but then because we're not an expert, we imagine that we don't know what we don't know. We don't see our blind spots. We're all blind to what we don't see, right? And so it's attempting to apply the Dunning-Kruger effect to other people, but I think it's
Right.
actually more empowering to watch for it in ourselves. That actually gives you more power to just like pay attention to when you don't have you're not an expert, and let that humility lead you into courage to find out more. And if you can
All
state
right.
somebody else's view in a way that they say, oh yes, that is my view, in fact, why don't you believe it, you just stated it so well, that's a good sign that you've entered somebody else's perspective.
That is a really good point. That's a good point. Okay, let's touch on number 4 was anxiety. I'll probably have a few things to say about anxiety, and then we'll try to breeze through the other ones.
Yeah.
And I wish we could take more time on all of them, but we are kind of running out of time here. So let's get
Yeah,
to
and I don't
anxiety.
even have that many notes here. So here I just said healthy fear protects you. So there's a healthy fear that will protect you from trouble. But there's this other thing, which is a kind of magnification of the negative beyond proportion.
Hmm.
Um, One of my daughters has been afraid of spiders, and she's been overcoming that fear. But it's like there's this extreme magnification of a small thing that's actually not threatening to you. The threat is not nearly as much as you think it is. And people say that there's a kind of negativity bias. I've read somewhere, I know you can't really quantify it exactly like this, but that the negative is like twice as interesting as the positive. It's like candy for the mind. And so the news tends to be negative because it grabs your attention, right?
Hmm.
There's a lot of positive things going on. And so we don't see the positive oftentimes. Hans Rosling has this TED Talk. This is my second favorite of all TED Talks, called How Not to Be Ignorant of the World. And he gives all this data showing various lines of improvement in the world, life expectancy, health, various things that people underestimate. That's the most interesting thing, is that people that he surveyed tend to think that things were more negative than they actually were. And so they concluded that talk with sort of this general principle that things tend, not always, but tend to be overall better than you might think through the lens of negativity bias.
There's another
And so
word
we
that
have power to encourage each other with that. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, there's another word that I learned for that as I was going through my anxiety, which I still deal with anxiety on a daily basis. But there was a word that I learned that kind of really helped me sort of categorize what's happening, and it was catastrophizing is the word.
Mm-hmm.
And so I learned this word originally, I believe, from J.P. Moreland in his book. And catastrophizing is basically what you just pointed out, where it's kind of this negativity bias, where you're really focusing on like the worst case scenario, and that's what you're really, really worried about. When in all probability, that worst case scenario is probably not going to happen. But nevertheless, that's what's like driving us and constantly triggering our anxiety and getting us to really like get in these, what I call anxiety loops, where you like can't get out. You can't stop thinking about something. You're just like thinking about it all day long. You can't get out of it. And yeah, I mean, you can see how that can really be a barrier to getting at truth. It's like you're focusing on these things that are not really relevant, but they just seem like big threats to you when in reality they're not. But that's just how anxiety works. It's like the opposite of rational is what anxiety is. And so when I always encourage people, if you're dealing with anxiety, talk to a professional. For sure, talk to a professional. But before you really start to like dig into the issues, like philosophically behind any sort of political idea, before you do that, if you're battling anxiety, get your anxiety under control first, and then start to look at things. So I've noticed in my own battles with anxiety is that it comes in waves. So it'll be really bad for like a couple months when my anxiety is like peaking. And it's not just like one day it's really bad and one day it's not. It's like every day I've got to be mindful of like where my stress and anxiety levels are at so that I can battle them appropriately. But as it comes in waves, I know that it's not going to be here very long. So I've just got to be mindful of how my body and my mind are sort of reacting to different situations, and just try to mitigate that and get in control of the situation and realize, hey, look, I'm not in any threat, even though I think I'm being threatened. I'm not. It's not as bad as it is. I mean, recently I was at the doctor, and I was thinking that I had this really terrible condition that was going to be just really bad, and it turned out it was something that can just be treated with like some medication, and it's not that crazy. But my anxiety at the time was just like through the roof. My heart was beating fast and all this stuff. So yeah, I say that to say that anxiety is a very serious thing. Talk to a professional for sure. If you have not done that, then do that. But if it's one thing that you're really battling with, and you experience anxiety when you have these conversations with people, and it's not just like, oh, I get anxiety every now and then. Having anxiety is very normal. I'll say that too. And I got that from my doctor. My doctor told me having like people get nervous. It's very normal when you're in a situation, like if you're going on stage to go like give a presentation, or if you're like, talking to someone that you haven't talked to in a while. It's normal to get nervous. It's normal to have anxiety every now and then. But if it's something you struggle with on a daily basis, then it's something like that's probably more serious than you think it is. So go take care of it and get it treated before you continue to look into these things or have conversations with people. So it's all about like just getting your priorities straightened out and doing what's best, I think, for you and pretty much for everybody else too. So it's not any fun to be around someone who's like really struggling with anxiety. So do what's best for you and for the people around you.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I had something in here about, we can't control even, when we're feeling anxious. And so I don't want to suggest anything that makes this light. So I appreciate how you said, yeah, it's a serious thing. And we need encouraging people in our lives. We need that. I know I need that. I've discovered that you can hardly ever over encourage somebody. Sometimes I think that uh, somebody I was talking with yesterday was wanting to express something encouraging, and I wanted to express something encouraging to that person. And I think we were both feeling a little bit shy about it because we didn't want to maybe overdo it or create something awkward. But I can just tell you that nobody has ever encouraged me, and then I felt like, oh, like please, like I wish you hadn't done that. So um, you can hardly ever over encourage somebody, and I think that's all part of it. I mean, we want to get to the truth, but we're human, we're real beings with all the dimensions of a real being, and we're not just purely rational machines. So all of this is connected, and just being
Yeah.
mindful of that, I think itself is helpful.
Yeah. So we're
So
trying
that's
to
it.
we're trying to pull ourselves out of the matrix, and the matrix is just being like controlled by your impulses and your emotions. And so being pulled out of that and just being mindful, it's not going to be like you just get it or you watch this video and you're done and like that's it, and now you can just like solely focus on truth, and now you're just like this perfectly rational being. It's not how it works. It's not how it's going to happen. It's a daily struggle. It's a daily thing that you've got to deal with. And I mean, in every conversation I have with somebody, there are things that I know I'm like I have impulses to do. Like I'm very impulsive when it comes to people who I find their ideas really silly. It's my initial impulse in a lot of cases is to just like make fun of them or be, laugh at their comments or just like say something really harsh and mean or mock them. And I realize that is one of my like that's one of the things that I struggle with. And it's a daily struggle. It's just like with any of this stuff, if you're battling something that's sort of naturally like you're naturally inclined to do, it's just something you've got to work on every day. And so it is challenging.
Yeah, yeah, I can relate to that. Yep. So
All
then
right,
the
so
next one I
let's just
had.
cover
Go
let's
ahead.
cover the other ones as quickly as we can, and then we'll close it out. I was thinking we'd take some
Yeah,
questions today, but
that
let's
sounds
not.
great.
Let's just end this one out because maybe we can do like another one where it's just a Q&A. But I
Sure.
would like to keep this one relatively short. So let's go through the remaining ones that we have. Maybe say a couple
Yes.
things about it,
So
and
I
then we'll
don't have a
close.
lot of notes on these, but I just wrote these down. So number 5, I said there's too much complexity. There's just too much information, and so you feel sort of lost at sea.
Hmm.
And this maybe causes you to not really care about getting to the truth because you feel like it's not possible. So that's a barrier. And it's a
Yeah,
legitimate barrier. I mean, all of these are legitimate. It's not like any of these are like, oh, and it shouldn't be that way or something. It's like, no, we all experience these things. And these are just being aware of these barriers, I think is helpful.
what this makes me think about is what I was talking about earlier, how like it's important to care about what academics have to say on some subject. And I know from personal experience, like if I'm looking into some area like religious epistemology, for example, when I'm looking into one specific area, I know that there's so much written on this. And so for me, that is kind of a barrier to like getting in. And there's barriers like that in other areas too. We were just talking about like exercising. It seems like there's just so much that you've got
Mm-hmm.
to do in order to actually like get out there and go run. And really all you've got to do is just like just start it. Just do something in that direction, and it's going to it's going to help you. And sometimes you may even want to do more than what you initially set out to do. But sometimes I mean you just got to do something. Don't just like stay where you're at.
Yeah. And that's related to the next one, which is that sometimes there's too much scatter, there's too much stuff. And I gave the example if you go on a Facebook or you come into an arena of idea conflict and there's too many things drawing your attention, there's too many debates going on. And different people, I think, are suited for certain discoveries more, not to exclude them from others, but that there's certain things where it's like, inside when that's something you really want to understand that. And if you stay focused on something, then you're going to gain more understanding about the thing that you're focused on. In my dialogue with Felipe, it was very interesting how together you might think, oh, this endless debate on the existence of God, right? Like we can never resolve this. But actually, by focusing together on trying to gain an understanding of things, we uncovered things together. We uncovered some common ground that I thought was very interesting. And I can just say that philosophers who have diverse views, who continue to seek truth about something, if they're not polarized, okay, if there's enough cooperation, enough sense of we're in this together, then there comes into view some things. There is progress, is what I'm trying to say. There is progress. You will make progress in whatever you look into with enough focus and diligence in any area that you look into. But the danger is if you get too scattered, you're scattered all over the place, and then you won't sustain that progress.
How do we battle that?
I don't know.
Overcoming the scatteredness and the kind of anxiety that produces or might produce. So like it wants you to take you away from like going into a conversation just because there's like so much going on. So maybe just start small, I think is a way to think about that. So instead of tackling the entire thing, how do we fix all of healthcare? Like you're probably not going to do that in a Facebook conversation, right? So maybe just talk about pick one little thing that you want to talk about, maybe the individual mandate or something else, or, I don't know. I think there's ways of mitigating that.
For sure. I mean, I don't have a general solution, but I can tell you, we were talking before the show about exercise, and I found that what finally got me past the barrier from not exercising to exercising was giving myself permission to do just a little bit, one little run around the block. And I think it's the same thing if you're writing something, just do a little bit. Give yourself just a little bit, like a 5-minute rule. Like every day I'm going to write for 5 minutes. I've done this, and a whole book comes out of that sort of process over time. And it's the same thing with truth seeking. I like what you say there, Cameron, about start small, dream big, start small. They say, right? Just start small and stay focused, and focus on the things that really sort of ignite you, the things that are really most interesting to you personally, and then stay focused on those things. And a lot of that is just giving yourself permission to cut out the clutter, to stay off of social media, giving yourself permission to do less. Less is more in that sense.
All right, let's go. Let's keep going through these different
Focus
barriers.
on what you can control rather than on what you can't control is the empowering point. This, I think, threads them all together for me, is that we lose sight of getting to truth when we're trying to control things we can't control. We're trying to control what other people believe. We're trying to control how other people will perceive us. We're trying to control that negative narrative that we hate about us. We're trying to expose that so that they'll stop, right? But we can't control that, right? So what can you control? Well, you can control whether you're going to read a book by an expert. You can control whether you're going to scan for the positive in those who disagree with you. You can control whether you're going to decide to be cooperative in the pursuit of truth or to be divisive. Like, you can control those decisions. You control whether you're going to go on top of that mountain, if you're going to aim to get on top of that mountain, or whether you're not going to. So control what you can.
Okay, let's move on to the next one. Filling your mind, filling your mind with thoughts about how others don't care about truth.
Right. Yeah. So this whole conversation is about, like, how do you care about truth in polarized context, or how do you avoid being an idiot or whatever? And so the way that you avoid being an idiot, of course, is to think about all those other idiots who don't care about truth, right? But that actually will not help you to avoid being an idiot yourself, because you're distracting yourself by looking down on others. That's not very empowering to you. And you can choose, everybody does this. We all know what it's like to be thinking about other people's vices. We all know what it's like to do that. And then we can just catch ourselves doing that and just ask the question, is this making me happy? Is this making me empowered? Is this helping me get to truth? Is this helping me? And if it is, if it actually is helping you to think so negatively about all those people, well, I'm not going to judge that, but it doesn't help me. I don't find that it helps me. So
yeah. So in addition to just like, this is going to help you seek truth more, is to just stop doing this. But it's also, I think, a moral principle that it's like immoral to do this on a consistent basis. And, obviously you've heard of the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And is that what you want? Like, would you want someone else doing that to you? Probably not. You probably don't want other people just like calling you dishonest all the time, or calling you irrational, or telling you that you don't care about truth. But is that what you're doing to other people? So I think that there's like two reasons. There's sort of self-interest reasons are not necessarily incompatible with moral reasons. What I'm saying here is that there's two different reasons that you can have for wanting to do this. One of them is that there's a moral principle here, like do unto others as you would have them do unto you. But then also it's just like, if you want to care about truth, this is a barrier that's going to keep you from doing that because it's a distraction. It makes you think about the other person, like the faults of the other person, as opposed to the truth and getting at the truth. So yeah, I just think that there's an additional reason here to really
Yeah,
do that.
that's really good. I just actually noticed something about myself as you were sharing the two reasons. I was like noticing it seems like I have this tendency to try to put all the reasons in terms of how it will empower you. And maybe that's because I have this thought that like if you're bent on selfishness, then maybe we can play with that. We can play with your selfishness. So you are okay, here's how you can have power: being kind to others, scanning for the good, being careful in your thinking. So anyway, but that's not obviously the only reason. I was just noticing that.
All right, let's
Yeah,
get
that's
to
good,
the other
Cameron.
two, the last two, defensiveness and then controlling others rather than yourself.
Yeah, so if you're preoccupied with proving that you are the one who's right, rather than spending your energy trying to prove something good about the other person's position, uh, that makes a difference. And if you spend time trying to prove that you're the one who's right, you can sort of get distracted from trying to understand more about the world or about, let's say there's a political tension and you're not really sure what maybe you think you are sure about, like which way the country should go, but you haven't understood exactly why people disagree with that. And you can investigate that, or you can spend your energy defending yourself. And so I think if you spend all of your energy trying to defend yourself, you're going to lose energy that you could be using to get to the truth.
Getting back to so defensiveness, what it seems to me like one of the barriers to that, to getting over your defensiveness, is that in order to do that, sometimes in a conversation or even in your own thinking, you've got to be vulnerable. You've got to be vulnerable to the fact that, look, I might be wrong about this. And that's okay. It's okay. Look, there's a principle I think about a lot, and it has to do with criticism. Like, how do you deal with criticism? It seems like such a hard thing. Like, why? And people are really bad at it, dealing with criticism. But here's the way that I think about it. And I heard this from someone else, and it's really stuck with me. Is if the criticism is good, then that's actually a good thing. You can grow from that. You can get closer to the truth. You can grow, and that's great. It's good if the criticism is good. But what if the criticism is like bad or inaccurate? Then it shouldn't bother you because it's bad or inaccurate. It has nothing to do with actually reality and what's going on with you. So criticism, although I think our initial reaction, I think the reason why we get defensive with criticism is because we realize that we have some sort of failing when it comes to the first one, because it's a good criticism, but we know that we have some kind of failing, like maybe we don't know as much as we think we know, or we're not able to persuade people, or there maybe you were bullied when you were younger, and this person is talking to you is like bullying you. But the criticism itself, if it's a good criticism, it shouldn't bother you. It should you should look at that as like, this is a chance for me to grow. I can get better at what I'm doing. I can grow in knowledge. So that's a good thing if the criticism is good. And again, if it's bad, then it shouldn't bother you. And I can see
And
why
it's
why it
and it
would bother
also
some
gives you
people.
feedback. It gives you feedback because I'm sorry to interrupt there, but if somebody criticizes you and it's like, well, actually that you don't really know me, that wasn't really what I was doing. Still, they're letting you know how you're coming across.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And that might be unfair. It might be like, well, I shouldn't be coming across that way, but that's still information. It's valuable information that you can use to help you to figure out ways of coming across that are better. Of course,
Yeah.
obviously you can't control how everybody perceives you. I mean, you could be so helpful to some people, and then other people who don't know you will accuse you of things that have nothing to do with you. So you need to not take that personally, right? Um, but at the same time, every bit of criticism can just be thought of as feedback if you don't take it personally.
I like that a lot. All right, let's get to the last one and then we'll close out this live stream.
So I feel like this really puts them all together for me. And by the way, I feel like the reason that I'm coming up with this list is because these are all things that I've personally like experienced. Like I've experienced spending time being defensive. I've experienced filling my mind with thoughts about how others don't care about truth, right? I've experienced this. And then I've experienced what it feels like to then kind of shake out of that and then the difference there. And so this final one, I think, puts it all together, and it's about controlling what you can control. So I say controlling, if you control others rather than yourself, then that's a truth trap. You're going to spend your energy trying to control things you can't really control, and you're not going to be able to get to the truth yourself because you're not controlling how you're researching, how you're looking into things. And I think if you want to actually help others change, you just model it. You model the change that you want to see in others. You work on it for yourself. You become the best person at X that you can be, and you then let others be free. In a sense, you let them be free. So that's
So I'm actually
so the summary of everything is, I have this verse here. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such things, there's no law. So it's like you actually have control over whether you're going to operate out of love, out of joy, out of peace, out of patience, kindness, etc. And if you see people operating out of those things, get closer to them, be encouraged by them. And if you see people operating out of an opposite spirit, go ahead and give yourself permission to put up some healthy boundaries so that you're operating with people who are on this sort of team of trying to promote good things for everybody, so that truth flows from mind to mind in a way that springs forward from different perspectives so we can all learn from each other, rather than locking up truth in tribes, in tribal warfare, where the opposite list is like dissension and contention, the list that he gives next after the fruits of the Spirit. We want to try to stay away from that in ourselves as much as we can. And I think that's how we have the most impact.
Well, what you just said made me really think about how the people that we surround ourselves with can really be a barrier to caring about truth. If we only hang around people who are very dogmatic and they don't really care to take in evidence or change their views or be open to being wrong, then that can rub off, and it could really prevent you from caring about truth yourself. So I think that's important too, is hanging around the right people. And obviously that doesn't mean that you just like, it doesn't mean you just pretend like you're the bigger or better person, right? It's not about that. It's about like, look, I want to hang around people that are going to make me better. And so, all right, let's get to a super chat. This is Mickey Isum. He has a question for you, Josh. He says, talking one-on-one makes it much easier to find charity and truth-seeking. But what can we do for public discourse, for media, how to adapt?
Yeah. I've noticed that there are different techniques for different stages. It's a really great question, because if I'm having a one-on-one, especially if I can see their face, I feel like I can build rapport. Talking in a public context and lots of people are watching, and let's say it's a debate and it's one-on-one. Well, now it's different, right? Because the stakes are different. It's like our reputations are at stake. Another context is where I'm engaging a public. So it's not a debate in front of a public, but I'm engaging a public. And to be honest, I've been sort of experimenting in all three of those and trying to figure out, okay, what's the best way in each of those. In the one where I'm engaging a public, I think it's really important that the people that you're engaging feel that you actually care about them. So you're not actually their enemy, right? That sounds maybe simple, but I've noticed this, like when I would make a YouTube video, I just like, if I can imagine that my audience is an audience of friends from different perspectives, then I'm going to be more effective at engaging them. And even then there's a symbiotic relationship where I can then learn from them. If I'm having a debate with somebody in front of a public context, here if we had more time, and I'm not going to go into this, I would tell you like all the mistakes that I've made, that I've discovered, and there are other mistakes I haven't yet discovered. But from the mistakes that I've discovered, it seems like really, if I can create an atmosphere where even my debate partner feels like we're on the same side to get something clear, then we can both win. If instead you make the bar to establish that this is true or not true, then you cannot both win by definition. So somebody's going to lose. And so then it's harder to have that productive conversation in the public. But if you can create a goal where you can both win, and for me, it seems like a helpful goal is, my goal is to get things clearer. And so then we could actually both win together. I find that very helpful.
One thing you said earlier on that I think is really important to make note of again is that some of these tactics that you're using, or some of these goals, some of the things that you're doing, can be used in a manipulative way. So you could manipulate the person that you're talking with and try to get them to think that you're on this thing together when really you just want to like win. You want to like make them look silly or want to win the conversation, whatever. So I think it's really important
Very nice
to have our goals set as like the actual virtuous thing that they ought to be set as opposed to like having your goal being, I want to look better, I want to look smarter, I want to appear a certain way or make them look stupid or whatever. You know, it's about having the right goal and not just manipulating them through these different things that we're talking about today. I think it's really important to emphasize that.
I find that I'll have to check my heart, and I can detect whether I'm motivated by fear or really by empowering somebody. And I can feel a difference. And it's so interesting, Cameron, because there are times when the thing that feels like love feels like it actually takes more courage because I'm afraid how it might come across. But I'll just do it. I'll just go for it. Like it's a little note maybe, or a response to something, or a way of putting something. And it seems like that tends to be received well. Whereas there are other times where it was actually fear that was motivating me to respond in that way, or to maybe not respond. And that gets felt. It gets felt, it gets communicated. And then that doesn't seem to be as helpful. So I feel like if in all three of those contexts I mentioned, the one-on-one, the public stage in a debate, or the public stage where you're imparting something, I feel like if you can just be in a state of being a gift, trying to be a gift or a conduit for something good for the audience, that's going to be more helpful for people.
So we had another super chat sent in, and I'm going to have to nerd out on it. I'm just going to have to, because it's way too fun to think about. All right, so Backwards Man 95 says, how does Reformed epistemology relate to political epistemology? So
I love this. Yeah. No, go ahead. Go first.
It's great. Yeah. So what I want to say is that I think it depends, and the way that I'm going to interpret this question is like, how can we apply Reformed epistemology to political beliefs? So here's the way that I think about it: is Reformed epistemology. Here's the idea behind it. If you don't know. Belief in God can be rational or can be reasonable apart from arguments. Like you don't need arguments in order to be reasonable, rational, justified in your belief in God. Okay, that's the idea behind Reformed epistemology. It's actually, if you're interested in this, Reformed epistemology is the majority position right now in among religious epistemologists. And so, but here's something that here's what I would say about this, is I think it depends. As it relates to political beliefs, I think it depends on your sort of undergirding epistemological principle. And I'm going to nerd out on philosophy right now. So some people, you may just like jump off right here. But let me just get this out. I can't stop myself. So it depends on the sort of epistemological principle that you have that undergirds your reason for thinking that Reformed epistemology is true. So let me explain what I mean by that. Suppose that you're a proper functionalist with respect to Reformed epistemology. So you think that if someone is functioning properly and they form this belief as a result of certain functions, certain brain functions that are proper or functioning properly. So if your brain was meant to produce the belief that God exists, basically, then on proper functionalism, that belief would be rational, justified, warranted, if we assume the sort of epistemological principle called proper functionalism. So it depends on your sort of undergirding principle that gets you to Reformed epistemology. So the question would be on proper functionalism: is some particular political belief, say abortion, part of the original design plan? Did God intend for humans to have that belief? And if so, then it would be considered properly basic. It would be considered rational and justified and warranted apart from arguments. So it really just depends on what you think, what beliefs are included in the design plan. That's what I want to say about at least proper functionalism as it relates to Reformed epistemology. But you don't have to adopt proper functionalism in order to adopt Reformed epistemology. You could adopt something else called phenomenal conservatism, which says that if it just like kind of seems to you that something is true, then you have some justification for thinking that thing is true. That's another really popular epistemological principle. But on that one, you don't have to have all the other baggage of proper function and everything, like your brain operating a certain way. You don't have to have that on this one. All you need is if some political beliefs say abortion, if it seems to you that abortion is true, then you have some justification for thinking that's true. And that doesn't mean that you're just never going to encounter an argument against it. It just means that initially you've got some warrant, you've got some justification for thinking that thing is true. So it really depends on, like, this is why I say that epistemology covers a multitude of sins. At least that's the thing that I like to say based on something else I heard from someone else, Tyler McNabb. He's the one who originally came up with this. But if you really understand epistemology, you can have a better understanding of how all of these things sort of tie in together. So it really depends on what the undergirding epistemological principles that you adopt are, and then you can really see if this particular belief applies. I think it could apply. Like, I think that certain political beliefs could be part of the design plan. So yeah, I think that there is some overlap here. Obviously, there would be some debate. Some people might think that no, that's not what God intended us to believe. And so yeah, that's all I have to say about it. Sorry for nerding out, and I'm certain that we just lost like 60 different people that were watching.
I thought that was really good. I'm not sure I have anything to add, really. I was trying to think, what else can I add to that? I thought that was really, really well articulated.
Appreciate that. Okay, well, let's go ahead and close it out. So I hope you guys enjoyed this conversation today. And as you may or may not know, a dear friend of ours, Ben Arbor, he tragically passed away very recently over the weekend, actually last weekend. He and his wife were accidentally killed. I guess it wasn't accidentally. They were killed in a car wreck. There were some people street racing, and they were both killed in a car wreck. They leave behind 4 kids. And so right now Josh started a GoFundMe for their family, for their 4 kids. And it's already met its goal. But obviously, if you can donate to this and help the kids out, it would mean everything. It would mean everything to the kids, to the grandparents, to all of the friends that are going to be missing these people. Ben, he's been on the channel a couple times. He was just incredibly smart. He was on the board of Capturing Christianity. We have a nonprofit organization, and he was on the board. He was one of the board members. So it's like, and Josh and I, we both knew him personally. So it's just a really, really sad situation. But if you can help, then go check out the GoFundMe. I'm going to link it in the description of this video. So if you just go click it, then you can support him. And Josh and I are thinking about how we can best honor Ben. And so Josh, I haven't talked to you about this, but I'm thinking that it might be cool to do a video where we pull on a few different people and we can talk about Ben's legacy. And even though he was taken way too young, we can talk about the things that he left us with and the impression that he gave us. So is there anything that you'd like to say? That the reason why I mentioned that is because we initially had something else to talk about today, but we pushed that back and we decided to talk about this today, just an open conversation about how to really care about truth. So is there anything that you'd like to say on that, Josh?
Yeah. Thank you for that. We learned this last Friday, and it's hard to really comprehend it. I created the GoFundMe page for the kids, and there's going to be a trust that the grandparents will have ownership of. And I don't know, it's almost like I just had this thought that the gifts that people are giving, which is incredible, it's just amazing just to see them come in and that support, and that it communicates that Ben's life was so meaningful, and it communicates that to the kids, Ben and Meg, his wife. It's like the kids are receiving almost like this expression of this is how much your parents meant. And obviously money can never cover a loss like that. But I'm just very grateful to see the support coming in, and I'm not sure really what else to say. Words can never really do justice to something like that. So I don't really have good words, but just thank you.
Well, hopefully we can put something together to honor him. So I'll be thinking more about that. But anyways, thank you guys for tuning in today. I hope you enjoyed it, and we will see you guys in the next Capturing Christianity video. See you guys later.